The Universes Beyond Spider-Man set doesn't release until September 27th, but today we got some super early spoilers, so let's break them down. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Seth from Olive, and it's time for a super early sneak peek at Spider-Man spoilers. So the Spider-Man set doesn't release until September 27th, so we're looking like 6 months and 4 sets into the future with these spoilers. But out of the blue today, Wizards spoiled 6 cards from the set, so I want to do a video breaking them down. Before we do, I gotta mention a couple things about this set itself. So first, these 6 cards are from the scene box for Spider-Man. You might remember scene boxes from Lord of the Rings. It was a supplemental product where you got 6 essentially promo cards, which these cards are for the Spider-Man set. You got 3 play boosters, so you got some art cards. MSRP I think is $42.99 for this one. So if you want these cards, you're guaranteed to get all 6 of them by picking up one of the scene boxes. Also worth mentioning that because these are scene box cards, they're not standard legal. So the Spider-Man set is standard legal. We actually found out this week there's not even any Commander precons for this set, but these cards in specific, because they're from the scene box, are not standard legal, and these cards are really designed for Commander according to Wizards. The other thing I want to point out about these cards before we get into the spoilers, you might have noticed the oval hologram. So traditionally, in-universe sets get the oval hologram, and then Universes Beyond sets get a triangle hologram. Well, with Spider-Man, this is changing, and Wizards is just going to give the oval hologram to all cards, whether it's Universes Beyond or not. And I think one of the things Wizards has really kind of pushed lately is Universes Beyond is Magic. They view it the same as an in-universe Magic set, and I think that changing the holo is a way for Wizards to reinforce what they're trying to get across to the community, which is from their perspective, be it Spider-Man or be it Ether Drift, Ixalat, or be it Zendikar, or be it Dominaria, they view it all the same. So having the holograms be the same is a way to send a message to people that you should view these cards the same and not treat them any different because they're Universes Beyond cards. Whether or not that actually is going to have an impact on how players interact with these, that's a whole other question. But worth noting, this is a set where that change is happening. So let's get to the cards, but before we do, 2 quick reminders. If you need any of these cards, you'll be able to pre-order them from our sponsor Card Kingdom eventually. I imagine not yet since it's so early, but you get it from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTG Goldfish. And to keep on all the latest spoilers throughout the day, which is getting more and more important because you never know when some random spoilers are going to drop, you should head on over to mtgpreviews.com. So anyway, let's briefly break down these 6 Spider-Man scene box cards. So let's start with Sensational Spider-Man. And at first read, I will say, this Spider-Man doesn't really look all that strong to me. But remember, these are scene box cards. I imagine we're going to get a bunch of Spider-Mans, and this might not be one of the stronger Spider-Mans. Actually, in the article spoiling these cards, Wizards mentioned that Spider-Man is actually Bant. So I imagine we get a Bant Spider-Man at least. There's probably one that's pushed for standard. But Sensational Spider-Man, it's a 3-mana Azorius 3/3 legendary spider-human hero. And it says whenever it attacks, tap target creature defending player controls and put a stun counter on it. Then you may remove up to 3 stun counters from among all permanents. Draw a card equal to the number of stun counters removed this way. So the thing I like the most about this Spider-Man is we've never really had a stun counters matter commander before, and I think that's going to be the purpose of Sensational Spider-Man. If you want to build around this, you just play a ton of stun counter stuff, and use Sensational Spider-Man is this ridiculous card advantage engine. Like, in theory, if you have enough stun counters, you can be drawing 3 extra cards in Ancestral Recall for free each turn just by attacking with Spider-Man. So I think that's the goal for this card. There's a few cards that work really well with this. Some of the best are going to be creatures that you control that put stun counters on themselves is sort of a drawback. So like the Watcher in the Water, this big 5-mana 9/9, but it comes into play with 9 stun counters on it. If you read Sensational Spider-Man closely, you can remove the stun counters from all permanents. So what you can do is attack with Sensational Spider-Man, tap down your opponent's best thing, put a stun counter on it, but then remove 3 stun counters from the Watcher in the Water, draw 3 cards, and get closer to turning Watcher in the Water into an untapped creature, or like Sleep Curse Fairy, kind of the same. Comes into play with 3 stun counters. You want to get rid of them so you can eventually have it be untapped and do stuff. Sensational Spider-Man removes the stun counters, and it's going to draw you a bunch of cards. We also have like Sherry the Numbing Dabs, which will trigger when stuff becomes tapped. So those are the kind of cards I think you're looking to play with Sensational Spider-Man. The other hilarious thing you can do with this card is build like universes beyond soup. It turns out the stun counters are a pretty recent invention to Magic, and a lot of universes beyond sets have some sort of random stun counter theme of them. So you can play like Sensational Spider-Man as your commander, play some Lord of the Rings and Watcher in the Water because it works really good with stun counters, Mjolnir Stormhammer from Assassin's Creed also puts stun counters on things, even Canes of Androzani, Doctor Who card that puts stun counters on things. So maybe just play Sensational Spider-Man and throw in all this random universes beyond stuff and have the great meeting of the IPs, like some sort of Fortnite battle in Magic. So I think Sensational Spider-Man, like I said before, I imagine when the set's all said and done, this is probably going to be one of the weaker Spider-Mans, but I really like that it's a commander that cares about something we've never cared about before, which is putting stun counters on things. So I think it's actually a super fun design, and I think it could be a cool commander to build around. We also got Venom, and Venom Deadly Devourer. So a 4-mana Golgari symbiote villain. It's a 4/4 with Vigilance and Menace, and this says pay 3, exile target creature card from a graveyard. When you do put X+1/+1 counters on target symbiote, where X is the exiled card's toughness. So when I first read Venom, I was like, okay, symbiote, how many of these do we have in Magic? I looked it up. The answer is literally 0. So right now, as it stands, the ability of Venom only really works with Venom itself, although I imagine we're probably going to get some symbiotes in this set. So I think the way that you build this, other than doing like creature type changing shenanigans with Maskwood Nexus to make everything into a symbiote or whatever, is I think you build this like a graveyard Voltron commander. It actually reminds me the most of Viral's the Scar Stripe, which let you exile creatures from your graveyard with Scavenge, put a bunch of counters on things. A lot of the same shenanigans work with Venom. So imagine like you fill your graveyard, you get a Death Shadow in the graveyard, you can pay 3 mana, exile the Death Shadow, put 13 counters on Venom, which is going to make it a 17/17 Menace Vigilance all by itself, and then just start attacking people. Maybe exile Phyrexian Dreadnought for 12 counters, or Tree of Perdition, or Tree of Redemption for 13 counters. It seems pretty easy to play Venom, and by activating its ability maybe twice, turn it into a commander that's big enough to just one-shot kill people with commander damage. So until we get more symbiotes, I think that's the easiest way to build around this. And then you just play all the graveyard filling stuff. It is kind of like a self-mill style deck because you want to get a bunch of stuff in your graveyard with high toughness to exile the Venom to make it really big and one-shot people. So Cemetery Tampering, Stitcher Supplier, Stinkweed Imp. Also worth mentioning, you can exile creatures from any graveyard. So if you're building a Venom deck, you're obviously going to build it as a self-mill deck and put high toughness creatures in your deck to be able to combo with Venom. But it is nice that if your opponent goes to reanimate something busted or they get some massive creature in their graveyard, you can't just snipe it with Venom and make it even bigger. So I think Venom seems like kind of a cool self-mill graveyardy style commander, but really we got to see how many more symbiotes we really got, because right now this is the only one that exists in Magic. We also got maybe my favorite new commander from the set in Green Goblin Nemesis. So a Rakdos. I don't know why the Green Goblin is Rakdos. We don't think too much about that. But a Green Goblin, a Rakdos 4-mana 3/3 Goblin human villain. Also, don't think too much about the Goblin human thing. In its flying, it says whenever you discard a non-land card, put a +1/+1 counter on target goblin you control. And whenever you discard a land card, create a tapped treasure token. So I really like Green Goblin Nemesis. This self-discard thing is something that Wizards really has just embraced in the last couple of sets. And I think there's a couple directions to go with this. So I honestly think that the Goblin text on Green Goblin, it might be a bit of a trap. You'll probably play a few goblins in your deck, but goblins aren't really known for their discarding shenanigans. I think probably the best discard goblin is Sensation Gorger, where if you have a creature of the same type, a goblin on the top of your deck, you can discard your hand and draw 4 cards on your upkeep, which seems like a good way to trigger the Green Goblin. Also worth mentioning, it's whenever you discard a non-land card. So if you discard 5 cards, you can put 5 counters on goblins. Fable and Mirrorbreaker makes goblins, flips into a goblin, Crease Wrench Goblin, Rummaging Goblin. So there are a few goblins that work here, and you'll probably throw the good ones into your deck. But the reason I'm intrigued by this isn't so much to build a goblin deck with it. We have some really good goblin commanders, but I think this is a really interesting self-discard commander, because remember, Green Goblin itself is a goblin. So even if you play no other goblins, you just play this like a Voltron commander. As you're discarding stuff, you put the counters on the green goblin, it already has flying, and again, kind of like Venom, you just build it into this one-shot kill threat where you smash your opponent for one attack and win the game. So cards that work really well with this, stuff like Wheel of Fortune, Key to the City, Faithless Suiting, anything that's going to allow you to just be discarding cards and drawing cards, discarding cards and drawing cards. So you can trigger Green Goblin to grow really big, and if you discard lands, you get to make treasure, so you can cast even more stuff. They are tapped, which keeps you from going like full-on combo mode with the card, but still, it seems very, very powerful as a self-discard commander. It kind of reminds me of Captain Howler's Sea Scourge, one of my favorite commanders from Aether Drift, except Captain Howler's in Izzet going into Rakdos instead actually opens up a whole nother and maybe scarier way to build around the Green Goblin. So of course, you'll play the same stuff that you play with Captain Howler, stuff like Glinthorn Buccaneer, which deals damage when you discard, Monument to Endurance, so good in a discard deck, Magmakin Artillerist to deal more damage, Bone Miser, a nice black edition, one of the best payoffs for discarding. But the really intriguing part of this is if you want to build super mean Green Goblin, then you can play all these black cards that you couldn't play with Captain Howler that are really, really brutal and cause symmetrical discard. For example, something like Smallpox. 2 mana, each player loses a life, discards a card, sacks a creature, sacks a land. This card absolutely wrecks people. But if you build your deck around it with recursive threats or lands that do something when they die, you can kind of break the symmetry of it. Worst case, it's going to trigger your Green Goblin as it's wrecking your opponent. Same with like Pox or Death Cloud, which are just like even more bigger, brutaler versions of Smallpox. And then you get like Rotting Rats, Necrogen Mist, Liliana the Veil, all these symmetrical discard effects where it's going to really annoy your opponent because they're not going to have any cards in their hand to do things with, but you don't really care because every card you're discarding, you're making treasures, you're growing your Green Goblin. So I actually think Green Goblin seems like a really fun commander to build around. You can either build it as like kind of a nice Goblin style deck with some discard synergies, or if you want to be mean, you can go full on Pox mode and just absolutely make everyone miserable until they get one shot by the Green Goblin. We also got Dr. Ock, Evil Inventor. And this is by far the least intriguing of the new legends to me. It's a 7-mana mere 8/8 legendary human scientist villain. It says at the beginning of combat on your turn, target non-creature artifact you control becomes the 8/8 robot villain artifact creature in addition to its other types. So essentially, you just ramp into this and play artifacts, and then your arcane signet becomes an 8/8. It's worth noting, I guess, that the robot villain, it permanently turns into that. So it's not like an end turn effect. So once you get to combat and make your arcane signet into an 8/8, it's going to be an 8/8 for the rest of the game, or until it dies at least. But other than that, I don't know. I don't see many shenanigans here. You just kind of like play artifact stuff into Mirror and then make big creatures and try to attack with them. So it seems like a fine card, although one that doesn't really interest me all that much. As far as the non-legends, we got Pumpkin Bombs, a 2-mana artifact. This says tap, discard 2 cards, draw 3 cards, and put a fuse counter on this artifact. It deals damage equal to the number of fuse counters on it to target opponent, and they gain control of this artifact. So Pumpkin Bombs, kind of next in the line of these weird card draw effects that give themselves to your opponent, kind of like an artifact humble defector or a yes man personal securitrod, where you use this and then it passes around the table, everyone else gets to use it. Discard 2 to draw 3. Seems reasonable. Like, yeah, you gotta have some cards in hand to use it, but that is letting you see a whole bunch of cards. The one shenanigan for this card, and I think the way this is designed to be played is fairly like a humble defector or something, where you're just like, okay, I'm gonna draw some cards, then you get it, you take a little damage, then you draw some cards, and then the next person gets it and they draw some cards. But the way this is worded, it does actually work with sacrifice effects. If you read it closely, tap, discard 2 cards is the cost of activating it, and then the ability is draw 3 cards, fuse counter, pass it around, all that stuff. So what this means is you can tap your Pumpkin Bombs, discard 2 cards, and put a trigger on the stack that says draw 3 cards and do all the rest of that stuff. And then with that trigger on the stack, you can sack it to like Oni Called Anvil, Shrapnel Blast, something like that. And then your opponents never get to draw cards with it. You get the value out of it. So something to keep in mind if you're a deck that can sack artifacts, it does go up a little bit more in value. Finally, we got Grasping Tentacles, a 3-mana Dimir sorcery. This says target opponent mills 8 cards. Then you may put an artifact card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So Grasping Tentacles, Unfortunately, it only hits one opponent. If this hit all of your opponents, even if it hit all opponents, but you only reanimated one thing, I'd be a lot more hyped about it. I'm not sure how good this actually is. So obviously, if you got a friend that's always playing an artifact deck, this card's going to be insane against them. Like, if I always knew there was going to be a dedicated artifact player at my commander table, I would run this in just about any deck. And I'd just be like, all right, milled artifact player, what's the best thing? I'm going to take it, put it into play for 3 mana. That seems absolutely ridiculous. But as it is, I'm a little worried that if you just play this in a random pod, what if no one's playing artifacts? I think this is like a high ceiling, low floor card. Obviously, if you cast this and get a Bolas's Citadel or a One Ring or some massive artifact creature, it's going to be insane. On the other hand, if you cast this and end up with like an Arcane Signet, you're going to be kind of disappointed. So I don't know how good this card is outside of dedicated archetypes. I feel like if I'm a mill deck, then I'm probably playing this card. Captain Nagathrod, Wise Mothman, Phoenix, anything like that. If I'm a mill deck, I think this is probably good enough, but I'm not sure it's good enough to jam in just like a generic Dimir deck, just because if no one's an artifact deck, I'm not sure I'm going to get enough value out of it. Anyway, those are our super early Spider-Man spoilers. Let me know what you think. And again, remember, these are the scene box cards. Like I said, I imagine these aren't the strongest versions of like Spider-Man or Venom or Green Goblin. They seem fine and interesting for Commander, but I'm guessing they probably aren't the most push versions of these cards. So keep that in mind. Don't judge the power level of the entire set based on these cards, because remember, these aren't even standard legal. This set's going to be standard legal. But let me know what you think about these cards. What do you think about this set so far? Which one of these are you most hyped building around in Commander? What about the non-legends, Grasping Tentacles, Pumpkin Bombs? Are those cards good enough to play? What decks are you going to put them in? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope y'all enjoyed it, and I will talk to you soon. Looking for even more magic? We can find last week's Commander Clash here and the latest Commander Clash podcast here.